presenter. Richard is a freelance editor, writer, materials developer, and online tutor. He has an MA in Educational Technology and TESOL from the University of Manchester, and is particularly interested in how teachers and students can get creative with technology. So, over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Laura. Can everybody hear me okay? Can somebody tell me? Good afternoon, good afternoon. Yes, 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 okay, crikey. It moves very quickly, that chat box, doesn't it? All these names flying past very quickly. I can see people, lots of people from Italy, some people from Russia, Ukraine, Switzerland. I've seen all sorts of things. Myanmar, fantastic, Sri Lanka. Thank you so much for attending, and thanks to CUP for having me this afternoon to ramble on at you all. If there's a time when my sound goes a bit odd, then please let me know in the chat box. So Argentina, oh hi Vicky, good to see that you're here. No, people are saying you can't see me. Yeah, that's probably a good thing, to be quite honest with you at the moment. But no, video is not part of this. You'll be able to see the slides, as Laura said, and just listen to me. I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm going to try not to cough, sniff, or otherwise make horrible noises that will put you off listening to me. Okay, so I hope everyone's feeling okay today. Apparently January the 24th is the most depressing day of the year, but that was calculated by a British psychologist. So perhaps only people in the UK are actually feeling particularly miserable today, or not, who knows. Okay, let's get going. Now then, first thing, I'd like you all to share some more information with the group. It would be interesting to know the answers to these questions for me and for all of you, to know something about your fellow participants. Please could you quickly write your answers to these two questions in the chat box. Some of you have started already, so I'll let you carry on and have a look at where everybody else is, what everyone else is saying, what they do. Lots of state secondary. Okay, fabulous. Mostly state secondary schools by the looks of things, although my eyes are going a little bit weird. Following with Tim Other. Hi Tim. Yeah, that's quite difficult to see. Maybe we'll peruse those answers in a bit later. What sort of experience of doing digital projects have we got? A little experience, some experience. Okay. I think can't even speak anymore. Generally, a lot of teachers have tried some things, but everybody feels to an extent like, firstly, there's more to learn in general, but secondly, it's such a, doing digital projects, quite a lot to get to grips with. So perhaps people saying they've got a little experience possibly have a lot to offer, a lot to share to other teachers. There'll be a few points in the webinar where we'll stop and share some ideas. Okay, now obviously you can chat in the chat box here, but in case you're one of the people out there who like to live tweet events, this is being live tweeted by Cambridge, somebody at Cambridge. If you want to share information about what you're learning and discuss things with others or raise questions on Twitter, this concept is actually called backchanneling, by the way, if you didn't know. If anyone is going to do that, feel free. Of course, you can do this with the group here in the chat box, but feel free to make comments and have a discussion in the background. Maybe you prefer the wider world of Twitter. If you didn't know, this is my Twitter username @Nutrich and the Cambridge username. And if you are on Twitter, why not use the hashtag DigiProdCup when talking about this presentation? Okay, let's get on with it. Now then, we're all trying to help students learn. This is our general aim, isn't it? I used to have a blog when I was teaching full-time, rather pretentiously called I'd Like to Think I Help People to Learn English, because that pretty much sums up my beliefs as a teacher, following the leading a horse to water adage. You can't make people learn, and teaching does not necessarily equal learning. And just to start with, I'd like to look back a few years to when I was teaching full time. I started to become particularly interested in how technology could help my students back in 2009-ish, just after I'd completed a Delta course. And I was living in a flat where I had Wi-Fi for the first time, and spent a lot of time reading ELT blogs. I came across ELT chat on Twitter, which is a great place to meet other teachers and learn stuff. But it was about the time where people started to talk about Web 2.0, which is refers to the read-write web, where you can produce your own content and share it online, which essentially has become very normal now. It's, the amount of content being shared online on the web every day is phenomenal, and that includes a lot of content created by teachers for teachers and by students themselves. I started to try out various tools, and I thought how exciting it would be potentially for my teenage students to get creative with some of these apps I'd found. And of course, with digital technology moving on so much, even over the last 6 or 7 years, it's much more feasible now for students to do work online and create digital end products, as it were, to quite a professional standard. Okay. Now, at around that time, I came across an article by a man called Adrian Underhill, who many of you will doubtless have heard of, though he's more well known for his work with the phonemic chart and pronunciation. But he wrote an article in which he suggested that student-generated content could, to an extent, replace, I've got to be careful what I say, but to replace some coursebook content. So he suggested this: if you want a certain piece of content, maybe the students could create it themselves. Now, this was quite a while ago. I think it was back in the 1990s. And his use of the word tape in this quote on the slide gives away the age of the article a little bit. But of course, this it's been possible for a long time, but now with digital technology, student-generated content can be of a very high quality. And it's this combination of technology and student-generated content which has had a big influence on the way I think about teaching and think about materials development, which is the thing I'm more involved in nowadays. So alongside this, the idea behind looking into digital projects is that it's something that can be very interesting for teenagers. A common challenge that teachers of teenagers face is how to keep them motivated, or maybe just to get them motivated in the first place. On top of this, the element of performance can be motivating, whether that's actually presenting something live to a class or posting material online on a blog. And for example, the idea of the work they've done having an audience can be very motivating. So that gives you a bit of background on where my ideas on this topic are coming from for a start. Okay, so the webinar blurb alongside the title said that I will discuss the benefits of getting students to do digital projects as a way to build 21st century skills and global awareness, and that I will give some practical ideas and tips for doing digital projects with your class, using examples from Eyes Open and Uncover. So in summary, what we're going to be looking at is what digital projects are, or what I'm suggesting they are anyway, how they can be done, and what connections can be made with these and the concepts of global awareness and of 21st century skills. Okay. So I think it's a good idea to look further into what some of these things are. There's a lot of stuff going on in this title and with the blurb. There's probably a week-long training course in there, really. So let's unpack that title, as users of business jargon like to say. I want to discuss what these things mean, and I should specify how I'm defining them. And it's important to note that I think there's a lot of debate about 21st century skills in particular, in terms of their classification, definition, meaning, and also for many people, whether they actually exist, or at least to what extent the term is relevant and useful. Some people really actively hate this term, 21st century skills. It really brings out some quite strong feelings in some people. But we'll look at 21st century skills in a little bit more detail shortly. First, let's look at what exactly I mean by a digital project. Mind you, perhaps we should pause for a moment, remove the digital bit, and unpack that, as they say, even more. What is a project? Because projects don't have to be digital, of course. I think sometimes things are referred to as projects just because a student makes something, and I don't think that necessarily means it's a project. So audience participation time. A question to you all. Add your comments to the chat box. How would you define a project in terms of schoolwork? What is a project? I'll give you a minute or so to add some information. Someone's saying e-twinning projects. That's interesting. So what is a project? Target to be achieved. Okay. Group work is essential. I would agree with that. Yes. Product. Yes. Okay. Oh, it does go fast, the chat box. Create. Okay. I think creating something, problem solving. Okay. Task. Project has to start from the students. Okay. We'll look at something regarding that later on. An aim, well, yes, that's definitely a good idea. Group work, creative, an aim, task, target. Okay. Lots of very interesting ideas. Result of research. Okay, that's certainly going to feature in what we're talking about today. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's sharing some very interesting ideas. I hope as you're writing, you're getting the chance to read what other people are adding to the chat box, because there's some great ideas there. Okay, fabulous. Now then, excuse me. Right, so what is a project? Thanks for your comments. To me, first up, it's worth making a distinction between what is a project and what is an activity. I think it's common to talk in terms of projects as things that the students will create, perhaps in one class by writing about something and drawing a picture or sticking a few cutout images to a large piece of paper to make a poster or something. But to me, and according to some of the literature, most of the literature on these matters, that's not a project. I think that's something that you've, in your chat comments that you've added there, it seems that we're generally in agreement that there's something of depth to a project, that it requires some level of research and lasts a bit longer, longer than one class with more stages. So that's great. Okay. The Cambridge Learners Dictionary has these definitions: piece of schoolwork that involved a detailed study of a subject. I'd definitely agree with that. Excuse me. Or, well, maybe not necessarily a subject, but certainly a topic or a focused piece of content. It's a carefully planned piece of work. Again, you've mentioned in the chat box about planning, which is very important. I agree. And it has a particular purpose. So again, Patrizia has just mentioned now, a plan with a specific goal. So yeah, having a goal, having a particular aim, having a purpose, and as many of you have mentioned as well, an end product. So that's great. Okay. A famous book on the subject by Diana, I don't know if it's Fried or Freed Booth, but her book on project work talks about this. Project work is student-centered and driven by the need to create an end product. Again, this is something that many of you have mentioned. Okay. So what's a digital project? Well, to me, it's a project that requires some online research, so locating information, which could be crowdsourcing as well, using social media to get information from other people. But to me, most specifically, it's something with a digital outcome, using apps or web tools to create an end product, and perhaps as well to share this product online, which creates the audience, as I've mentioned before. Of course, there's nothing against doing a project on paper in the first place, taking a picture of it or scanning it somehow and uploading it to an online space. That's sort of a digital project. It's a sort of low-level digital project, but if that becomes part of an online space and becomes part of discussion online, then you could argue that that's a digital project as well. Okay. Laura, some people are mentioning that the audio is terrible. Do I sound all right to you? Is this a specific project, a specific problem, or?
I think it sounds okay to me, Rich. I don't think you need to worry too much. Just carry on, and we'll manage any problems that people are having in the chat box.
Lovely. Okay, that's fine. I'll carry on. Now then, so a digital project could be one of these end products. Could be a video, picture collage, voice recording, any of these things. And there are plenty of apps out there that Teresa, that's a good point. Yeah, just using the net for research is not a digital project. Absolutely. So to produce something as well with an end product in a digital format, all these things together to me is a digital project. Okay. So what are 21st century skills? Well, these much argued over items can be brought together in these categories here, I think. I took this from a research paper released by Cambridge Assessment. This is based on somebody's research from like the OECD, ISTE, the International Society of Technology and Education. In general, these are the things that people are talking about when we're looking at 21st century skills. And we look at creativity, critical thinking, as you can see here. Okay. And it's looking at the right-hand side, skills for living in the real world. Skills for living in the world is something that relates to global awareness. So what is global awareness? So looking at that part of the 21st century skills table, these things are considered to be skills for living in the world and are related to global awareness. So we look at the top there, citizenship, local and global, and at the bottom, cultural awareness and competence. And all these different descriptions are things that are related to a global awareness, this idea of global citizenship, cultural awareness, cultural competence, intercultural competence. And it's often said that it's not possible to learn a language without also learning the culture. The thing is, when we're talking about English, what is the culture of English? And to what extent is that important? As a global language, is it more important for our learners to learn the culture of English-speaking countries? Or is it to learn how to be globally aware or interculturally competent, or whatever you want to call it? because the likelihood is that they will use English to communicate with other non-native English speakers and not necessarily native English speakers from from Britain, from the United States, Australia, Canada, and the other L1 English-speaking countries. So that's the relevance of that is this, that English is used by so many people from so many cultural backgrounds. Combining these ideas with teaching English seems like a natural fit. So understanding more about the globalized world is useful as part of learning English and learning about English. It's generally believed to be the case that the number of speakers of English as a second, third, or maybe even a fourth language worldwide far outnumber the number of L1 native speakers. So the chances are that the conversations are going to be, and the interaction is going to be between two non-native or non-first language speakers. So I think this definition of intercultural competence is good, and I think that becoming more globally aware can mean that students take steps towards achieving this. And this is something that the web can help with, and online interaction as well. Just a quick look, Ben Goldstein in a webinar just before Christmas was focusing on global competency, and he added this slide, which I think is useful to have a quick look at before we move on. Okay, so looking at what digital projects such as these might achieve, we're looking at using project work as a means of practicing language skills while also focusing on global awareness and practicing 21st century skills through researching a topic. So I think there's a relationship potentially with CLIL, depending on how deeply you get into the content or a topic. But I think doing digital projects offers all these things coming together, which I think is potentially quite a powerful thing. Okay, so if you arrived a bit late and missed anything, so far I've attempted to answer these questions. And hopefully I've given you all something to think about, and you've all been discussing bits and bobs in the background on the chat, in the chat box as well. So that's fabulous. Okay, so we're going to have a look at some published materials, which was mentioned before. In Eyes Open and Uncover, which are secondary courses written mainly by Terry Jones and Ben Goldstein, which I had the privilege of working on to an extent while I was working for Cambridge. So the way it works with this content is that the digital project material is an extra resource, and it provides an extension connecting to material from the student's book. This level 1 page is about daily routines, and this is from Eyes Open. So looking in a little bit more detail, you can see that the gapped text is about Cecilia from Chile, and at a basic level, the students can compare and contrast their own school day with hers, as well as doing the exercise which focuses on phrases related to daily routines. So taking that student's book material, we produced these project lessons. There are 4 per level, and I developed these in collaboration with Vicky Saumel, who is here somewhere today. Well, she's in Argentina, but I saw she was typing something in the chat box earlier, so it's great to have you here, Vicky. Hopefully you can see this to an extent. My screen is fairly small. Hi, Vicky, there she is. So the published ideas in these plans are relatively simple, and it's important to note that these were not produced with 21st century skills or global awareness in mind, particularly. They cover a range of topics which are extensions of topics or themes covered in the students' books. However, the course material in general very much includes topics related to culture and will help the students learn a lot about the world they live in. Now, what the projects do offer as well is a process, that's a procedure that's generalizable. The idea is that you, the teacher, familiarize yourself with the topic you're going to focus on in the project and the means of creating the project outcome, which is the digital end product. In this example, the students are being asked to create an audio slideshow. So the idea is that you create an example as class input first. An audio slideshow is a series of images, like slides like this, that you would record your voiceover. So you can find or take pictures, upload them to an app to create a presentation, and then add a voiceover. There are various apps you can use to do this. You can even do it to an extent in PowerPoint. And this is something that's actually quite simple to do these days with mobile devices and with apps. Okay. So this model that you would produce at the start is to provide an example and provide scaffolding to the students, give them a solid idea of what they're going to do, which is particularly good for maybe the less creative students who want to see something and copy it. And you would use it as input to introduce the topic. So the procedure in general is that you prepare something. This, to be honest, I created this slide just in case the previous slide looked terrible, but I think it was okay. So those are the sections of each project plan. Okay. In general, you provide a model, the students do some research, and they produce a digital end product. So on that project plan, this is the summary of what we're going to look at briefly now. This one is to research a school day in another country to find something out about what happens to other students of the same age in different places around the world. You are guided in the plan to prepare a model. And as you can see there, it connects to the secondary digital teacher training course, which is something, again, I developed with Vicky. And that is available on the Cambridge LMS. And this is a course that walks you through a series of ways in which projects can be developed using apps and web tools. That might be worth you having a look at. So this procedure suggests an introduction to use with the model presentation that you've created, and then it continues on in more detail. This would serve as a lead-in to get them thinking about the topic and could start a discussion. The project plan suggests some research questions that the students can use to guide their research. It may be that your students can write their own or add some more questions, but there are always some provided in each plan. Really, whether you're using these project plans or creating your own, it's up to you and your students how complex you want to make the project. It could be anything from an individual piece of research about typical breakfasts among teenagers in Bolivia, for example, to a team of 5 students, each with a different role, chosen by themselves, finding out the answer to a more complex question about law or politics in different countries. Obviously, everything depends on your class context, the age of the students, the level, etc. I think that ideally, as someone mentioned in the chat box before, the students will have as much control as possible over what they're researching and what they're producing. And perhaps the way you would like to manage the project means, or Perhaps it needs to be more scaffolded. It depends really. That's what these project plans are for. It's to give you the scaffolding and the support you might need to introduce this project idea, particularly if you haven't done much project work with students previously. And then there's a follow-up, and it's, as suggested there, you could have a class blog or something else to share work online. So the project cycle, if we're going to call it that, I'll call it that now, is based on this idea. Starting with preparation at the top, your preparation as a teacher, and then you go around and introduce the idea to the students. The students go through a procedure, they got their research questions, and then further on, after they've completed it, their presentation, they've shared this potentially online, you've assessed it, given feedback. I think it'd be a good idea to have a reflection stage as well, which offers them the opportunity to self-assess perhaps. Also, if you're going to continue doing more projects, they can think about how they can do projects better in the future and can work better together. And of course, this is focusing on their own learning, and learning to learn is part of metacognition, which is something regularly mentioned as one of these so-called 21st century skills. And the more the students are involved in decision making in terms of what they produce and how they do it and how they think about this, I think that's got a stronger connection with these life skills and the 21st century skills. So, introducing global awareness to the mix. Here are some areas which I think might make good themes to connect to global awareness. And they often do relate to course book materials and also to the concept of global awareness. Sorry, I lost my thread there, but there you go. So we'll look at a few of those things in more detail. So as we've seen already, that project from Eyes Open focused on routines. Routines are obviously very typical of level 1 course books, but are useful and interesting when looked at in more detail. They have a clear language focus for a start: time, present simple, adverbs of frequency. And looking at the routines of teenagers in other countries offers an opportunity to compare and contrast lifestyles. For instance, students in some countries do a lot of other classes after school, less so in other countries. This raises awareness of the lives of other people in other places. And I think there's a potential for an element of surprise at similarities and differences. I think in general, teenagers have a desire to learn about the world and how other people live. So this kind of topic can be motivating. Actually, in a recent webinar looking at culture, Kerry Jones talked about the importance of finding similarities, not just differences, to focus students on how teenagers in other countries are perhaps not so different to themselves. So using a digital project could take a fairly standard activity and perhaps a fairly boring topic, and it depends, and make it into something deeper, more meaningful, perhaps more motivating, as the students get to create something and tell some kind of story about themselves in relation to something they have discovered, for example. And they can present this, share it, and to an extent become teachers themselves, sharing their information with their classmates, perhaps the whole school, and more people if the work is shared online. Some other areas you might want to look at, which relate strongly to global awareness, potentially, is different behaviours, what is acceptable or expected in certain situations in different countries. So this brings in ideas of understanding and empathy and the knowledge of how other people live in different places. And often this can take into account things that are interesting or relevant for you and your students, which can't necessarily be published in course books for various reasons. Projects focusing on beliefs and politics and religion are generally avoided in textbooks but might be highly motivating and interesting and totally relevant for your students. Some teachers complain that these controversial topics are not published, but there's nothing to stop you getting into it in a project. Projects are also great ways to focus on current affairs, things that your students may be reading about or watching on TV right now, such as a focus of international news in the English-speaking world, certainly at the moment, is the concept of fake news in relation to certain political situations at the moment. And this has really got people to focus on the way in which we receive our news information these days and how we need to be more discerning about what we read and share online. This is very, very relevant to teenagers, I think, and relates strongly in part to culture, but also to the kinds of skills referred to as 21st century skills and the concept of digital literacy as well. So, as I've said, the published ideas in the project plans from Eyes Open and Uncover are relatively simple, and the project cycle I've suggested is also simple, but it's up to you and your students how complex you want to make the projects. From left to right here, it could be a simple piece of research about Bolivian food. This, I believe, is pique macho, which is making me feel slightly hungry. It could be a short podcast style recording by a pair of students discussing the arguments related to banning bullfighting in Spain, or maybe a complex longer term project involving a team of students, each with a different role, who are looking at something such as how has the 2016 vote on the EU impacted on the lives of immigrants in the UK for a higher level, slightly older age group. And they could produce a fairly professional video on that topic, I'm sure, and it would be an opportunity to really get into some research online. So it all depends on your context, the age and level of the students, and obviously the amount of time you have or the time you wish to dedicate to doing project work. It also depends on the technology available to you and your students. Not everyone has a tablet, let alone an iPad. So let's look a little bit more at choosing topics. Now then, this is here are some sections from pages in a unit, I think it's unit 3 of Eyes Open Level 3, which is a unit focused on art. So have a quick look at the content on the screen and add some thoughts to the chat box. Have you any ideas what projects the students could do on this topic? What could they produce, focusing on the content that you can see on screen? Let's share some ideas, and I'll shut up for a minute and have a drink of water. Yes, this is from Eyes Open Level 3. Their attitude towards art. Well, yes. Virtual tour of an art gallery or museum, that would be nice, yeah. Thank you, Simona. What is art, actually, yes. Get deep with that. Okay, so there's quite a lot of ideas flying around there. How different people see art. Street art is nice. Yes, graffiti is relevant. I think particularly art is a way of looking at the world, looking at art and how and what people have created and what art means and what art is to different cultures is potentially very interesting. So thanks for sharing some ideas there. Um, Now then, I've mentioned audio slideshows. We looked at as a Wordle earlier on with a list of different possible end products. So I'm very much aware that in terms of digital stuff, apps, etc., this presentation hasn't really focused so much on those. And to be honest, I'm not going to go through very much. And that's partly because it's very dependent on what technology you have available and what you're willing to do. Also, as I mentioned, well, I maybe mentioned before, I'm not sure. Listening to someone going on about different apps and websites is a bit tedious, I think, in my opinion. It's better to go and explore. Having said that, it's always good to have somewhere to start. So we'll start with a few suggestions here. Um, some apps are free and then they aren't. Some apps go freemium. They are free and then the best bits you have to pay for. It's quite difficult to choose. And we're going to have a look now at an example end product. To be honest, it's something that I created myself quite quickly as an example. And I used an app called Adobe Spark, which in my opinion is one of the best things out there. It's free and it has a library of images, icons and music that you can use without worrying about copyright or anything. So can we play that video now, please? Here we go. I'm going to talk about Bolivia. This is Bolivia. It's a country in South America. In Bolivia, there are farmers. In the world. Bolivia, the school year begins in February.
ends in November. The winter holiday is in July. And then summer holiday is from December to January.